Have you ever found yourself, working towards some goal only to realize later that what you really wanted was, well, something much deeper?
Or maybe you've looked at someone else and they seem driven by one particular thing, but you wonder, what's really underneath it all?
Yeah, exactly. Well, today on the Deep Dive, we're taking a really fascinating look at the bedrock of human motivation. We're using a truly foundational text to do it.
That's right. We're diving into the groundbreaking ideas of A.H. Maslow, specifically from his seminal 1943 paper, A Theory of Human Motivation.
Published in 1943. Wow.
Yeah, quite a while ago, but still so relevant. Our mission today is really to unpack Maslow's core concepts straight from that original work.
Right, to see how he shifted our view on what drives us and why understanding these underlying needs is just so crucial for understanding ourselves and, well, everyone else.
And we're going straight to the source, that 1943 publication in Psychological Review. It's like getting his ideas fresh, before all the later interpretations piled up.
Okay, let's get into it. Before he even gets to the famous pyramid, the hierarchy, Maslow first laid out these propositions, like setting the ground rules for how we should even think about motivation. What was he pushing back against? What was new here?
Well, what's really illuminating is how he challenged the psychology of his time. He argued pretty forcefully against the idea that simple drives, like, say, hunger, could be the model for all motivation.
Just hunger.
Yeah, he called them atypical, actually. Instead, he pushed for this idea of the integrated wholeness of the organism.
Integrated wholeness.
Meaning, we're not just a collection of separate urges stitched together, we're unified, interconnected.
So don't just look at one behavior, look at the whole person. That feels like a really big shift in thinking.
It was huge. And he stressed focusing on ultimate or basic goals, not just the surface desires we might notice first. This naturally gives more weight to unconscious motivations, too, stuff we might not even be aware is driving us. And he also pointed out that, there are various cultural paths to the same goal. So what looks different on the surface across cultures might actually be fulfilling the very same basic human need underneath.
Okay, here's where it gets really, really interesting for me. This idea that any motivated behavior must be understood to be a channel through which many basic needs may be simultaneously expressed or satisfied. One action hitting multiple needs. Can you give an example?
Yeah, sure. Think about someone, say, going for a PhD. Okay, on the surface, maybe it's about esteem needs, getting recognition, feeling competent.
Right.
But it could also be fulfilling safety needs, getting a more secure job, or even love and belongingness needs, connecting with like-minded people in their field. So one action, multiple motivations.
Okay, that makes sense. But it raises a question then, doesn't it? If one act can do all that, how do we know what the main driver is?
Right, and Maslow's answer was this concept. Human needs arrange themselves in hierarchies of prepotency.
Prepotency, meaning some needs just shout louder. They're more urgent, more fundamental.
Precisely. They demand attention before others can even get a look in. The emergence of one need, he argued, usually rests on satisfying a more potent, more basic one first.
Okay.
Which led him to declare, famously, man is a perpetually wanting animal. We're always wanting something. And he really disliked those simple lists of drives that were common then. He said we needed to classify needs based on their fundamental goals, not just the immediate urges. And importantly, motivation theory had to be human-centered rather than animal-centered. He wanted to understand people, not just reflexes.
That completely reframes it. Okay, so let's start at the very bottom then, the base of this hierarchy. Physiological needs. We tend to think of these as, well, pretty straightforward. Food, water, sleep. But Maslow's take was a bit more nuanced, wasn't it?
It certainly was. He brought in concepts like homeostasis, the body's automatic balancing act, keeping temperature or blood sugar steady, and even things like specific food appetites, which can signal what the body lacks. He used these to argue that needs like hunger or thirst are actually unusual rather than typical motivators.
Unusual. How so?
Because they're so specific, so isolable, you can often pinpoint them physically in the body. That makes them different from, say, the need for love, which is much more diffuse.
But he also said they're not entirely separate, right? Like, thinking you're hungry could actually be about needing comfort, not just calories. So there's overlap even at the base.
Exactly. And this is absolutely critical. Maslow states these physiological needs are the most prepotent. They have the highest priority. If someone is missing everything, food, safety, love, esteem, their main driver, overwhelmingly will be physiological.
Everything else just fades away.
Pretty much. All other needs become non-existent or get pushed to the background until that basic survival need is met.
Wow, that's a stark image. He writes, for someone extremely hungry, consciousness is almost completely preempted by hunger. Like their whole being becomes a tool for finding food.
Yeah. He even says, and this really hits home, utopia can be defined very simply as a place where there is plenty of food. It really makes you pause and think about basic necessities.
It really does.
And this connects directly to the next step. Maslow asks the crucial question. It is quite true that man lives by bread alone when there is no bread. But what happens to man's desires when there is plenty of bread and when his belly is chronically filled?
Okay, so what does happen?
Well, this is where the higher needs start to emerge. Because, he argues, satisfied needs stop being active motivators. They just exist in the background, potentially. We're only really dominated, actively driven by our unsatisfied needs. Once you're full, you start thinking about other things.
That makes perfect sense. So once that fundamental need for, say, food and water is reasonably handled, what's the very next layer that comes into play?
If those physiological needs are pretty well taken care of, then a new set emerges. The safety needs.
Safety, okay.
And these can be just as dominant. An individual can become, in his words, a safety-seeking mechanism. Everything else, love, esteem, whatever, can seem way less important than just feeling secure. Personal safety, financial security, health, just predictability.
And he suggested looking at infants and children to see these needs more clearly. Why there?
Well, in infants, their reactions to danger are much more obvious, right? They haven't learned to suppress them. So sudden loud noises, rough handling being dropped, even just losing support, these can trigger a total endangered response. And we also see kids really preferring an undisrupted routine or rhythm. They want things to be predictable, orderly. When parents are inconsistent or unjust, it makes kids anxious and feel unsafe, not just because it's unfair, but because it makes the world seem unreliable, chaotic.
That's insightful. So how does this play out in adults, especially in, a relatively stable, peaceful society where basic physical safety isn't an immediate daily threat for most?
Right. For the healthy, normal, fortunate adult, as he puts it, these safety needs are largely satisfied, so they're not usually active drivers day to day.
So where do we see them?
Well, Maslow said we see them more clearly in neurotic individuals or people facing really tough economic or social conditions. But in the average person, they show up as preferences, things like wanting job security, having a savings account, buying insurance, unemployment insurance, retirement plans, anything that provides a buffer against the unpredictable.
So even just preferring the familiar over the unknown or needing a belief system like religion or philosophy that makes the universe feel orderly, that could stem from safety needs too, that's broader than just physical safety.
Yes, definitely. Maslow links this to all sorts of safety seeking. He even suggests science and philosophy are partly motivated by this need to find order and predictability. And he points out how in neurotic individuals, this can become extreme. They might act as if a great catastrophe were almost always impending, maybe desperately seeking a protector figure. Or in, say, compulsive obsessive conditions, you see this frantic attempt to order and stabilize the world so nothing unexpected or dangerous can ever happen. It shows how a mild preference in a healthy person can become a life or death feeling when those needs feel deeply threatened.
It really highlights how fundamental security is. Okay, so once physiological needs are met and we feel reasonably safe and secure, what's the next level Maslow identifies? What do we start striving for then?
Then he says, emerge the love and affection and belongingness needs.
Love and belonging.
Yeah. The person starts to feel really keenly the absence of friends or a partner or children. They hunger for affectionate relations with people in general, basically, for a place in their group, their community, their family.
And this is a really critical level, isn't it? He links problems here to more serious issues.
Absolutely crucial. Maslow notes that thwarting of these needs is the most commonly found core in cases of maladjustment and more severe psychopathology. Loneliness and lack of connection are deeply damaging.
He also makes a specific point, doesn't he, to separate love from just sex. Why was that distinction important for him?
Very important. While sex can be an expression of love needs, and often is, it can also be studied just as a physiological drive, separate from emotional intimacy. The love needs, for Maslow, crucially involve both giving and receiving love and affection. It's about relationship, about connection.
Okay, and then moving beyond connection, what about our sense of self-worth, our desire for achievement and recognition?
That leads us right into the esteem needs. He argues that pretty much everyone has a need for a stable, firmly based, usually high evaluation of themselves. We need self-respect, self-esteem, and the esteem of others.
So it's both internal and external.
Exactly. It breaks down into two sets. First, the desire for strength, achievement, competence, confidence, independence, freedom. That's the internal sense of capability. And second, the desire for reputation, prestige, status, recognition, attention, appreciation. That's how others see us.
And what happens if these aren't met?
Well, thwarting these leads to feelings of inferiority, weakness, helplessness. It undermines our confidence and our ability to function effectively.
Right, so let's say someone feels basically safe, loved, connected, and they have a decent sense of self-esteem. Is that the end of the line? Are they just content?
Not according to Maslow. He says even when all these needs are satisfied, we often find a new discontent and restlessness will soon develop unless the individual is doing what he is fitted for.
And this is where self-actualization comes in.
This is exactly it. Self-actualization.
He has that powerful line, what a man can be, he must be. That sounds almost like a calling, an imperative.
It really does. He describes it as the desire for self-fulfillment. It's this tendency for a person to become actualized in what he is, potentially, to become everything they're capable of becoming.
And that looks different for everyone.
Completely different. It could be being an ideal parent, being a top athlete, painting, inventing. It's incredibly individual. It's not always about creativity in the artistic sense, but if someone has creative potential, that's likely how it will manifest. It's about fulfilling your unique potential.
And this really is the pinnacle, the drive that emerges only when the others are relatively satisfied.
Yes, he's clear that the clear emergence of these needs rests upon prior satisfaction of the physiological, safety, love, and esteem needs. He called people who reach this stage basically satisfied people.
Basically satisfied.
Yeah, and it's from these people, he believed, that we see the fullest and healthiest creativeness. But he also noted realistically that since basically satisfied people are the exception in society, we actually know less about self-actualization. It makes it a really challenging area to study, but maybe the most important.
Okay, so we've walked up the hierarchy.
Yeah.
But you often see it presented as these very strict, separate steps, like you have to be 100% done with safety before love even appears. Is that really how Maslow saw it?
No, that's definitely a common oversimplification. He explicitly said it's not nearly as rigid as we may have implied.
Oh, okay.
Most of us, he argued, are partially satisfied and partially unsatisfied in all our basic needs at the same time. It's more like decreasing percentages of satisfaction as you go up.
So like someone might be 85% satisfied physiologically, maybe 70% safety, 50% love, 40% esteem, and only, say, 10% self-actualization, that kind of thing.
Exactly like that. It's much more fluid, more like waves overlapping than rigid blocks stacked on top of each other.
That makes a lot more intuitive sense. What about exceptions, though? Or reversals? Can people genuinely prioritize, I don't know, esteem over love?
Yeah.
Or creativity even when they lack basic satisfaction?
Yes, he absolutely acknowledged exceptions. Some people might pursue self-esteem as a way to eventually win love, maybe thinking, if I'm successful, then people will love me.
Okay.
And he mentioned innately creative people, where that drive to create might seem to override almost everything else, even when basic needs aren't fully met.
And what about losing needs?
Yeah, he talked about how, for example, psychopathic personalities might seem to have permanently lost the need for love, maybe due to severe early deprivation, or how a need that's been satisfied for a very long time can be underevaluated. You don't miss it until it's gone, and then it comes roaring back. So what looks like a reversal might just be a more complex dynamic.
He also mentioned preconditions for satisfying these needs, things like freedom, justice, honesty. How do they fit in? They aren't needs themselves on the hierarchy, are they?
No, they're not needs in the hierarchy, but he called them immediate prerequisites. Essentially, they're the necessary conditions for basic need satisfaction.
Like enabling factors.
Exactly. A threat to freedom or justice or fairness is reacted to almost as if it were a direct danger to the basic needs themselves. Because, well, if you don't have freedom of speech, how can you fully satisfy your need for connection or esteem? If there's no justice, how can you feel safe? They're not ends in themselves in this model, but crucial pathways to the ends, which are the basic needs.
That clarifies things. Okay, one more area. What about curiosity?
Yeah.
Our desire to learn, to understand the world. Where does that fit? Is it just part of self-actualization?
Maslow actually gave this special attention. He introduced the desires to know and to understand as distinct cognitive needs.
Cognitive needs.
And he even suggested they might form their own little mini hierarchy where the desire to know, gather facts, be curious, is prepotent over the desire to understand, to analyze, organize, build a system. He argued these are conative, meaning they're striving, goal-directed needs, and just as much personality needs as the basic needs. He even speculated that this drive for knowledge can be so strong that people pursue it even at great cost to the individual's safety. Think of explorers, scientists risking things to learn more.
Wow. So taking all this together, the hierarchy, the fluidity, the preconditions, the cognitive needs, what's the big takeaway for understanding why we do what we do? It sounds much more complex than just, I'm hungry, so I eat.
Well, the first big takeaway is that behavior is almost always multi-motivated. A single thing you do, like we discussed with the PhD example, can be a channel through which flow various determinants, satisfying several needs at once.
Right.
He also made an interesting distinction between coping behavior, which is purposeful, goal-seeking, trying to deal with the world, and expressive behavior.
Expressive behavior.
Yeah, which isn't really motivated towards a goal. It's just a reflection of the personality, like the way a healthy child moves freely or the way a confident person carries themselves. It's just not doing for a specific purpose. Not all behavior is motivated in the goal-directed sense. Some is just expression, some is learned habit, some is purely reaction to stimuli. It's a rich mix.
That adds another layer.
Yeah.
And finally, he made this really profound, almost challenging statement about what it means when our basic needs aren't met. He didn't mince words, did he?
No, he really didn't. He made this bold postulation. Quote, a man who is thwarted in any of his basic needs may fairly be envisaged simply as a sick man.
Sick, like physically sick.
He drew a direct parallel. He argued that being chronically deprived of love or safety is just as much a cause of pathology, of sickness, as a lack of vitamins causes physical illness. If someone is constantly, actively struggling to meet any of the basic needs, physiological safety, love, esteem, then in Maslow's view, that person is unhealthy. It really forces us to look at human well-being much more holistically. Psychological and emotional health are just as vital as physical health.
So wrapping this all up, what does this deep dive into Maslow's original 1943 thinking really mean for you listening right now, for how you understand yourself or the people around you?
I think it really drives home that our motivations aren't simple or isolated. They're deeply interconnected. They're layered. There's this hierarchy of urgency. And understanding which needs might be unmet in ourselves or in someone else can give us incredible insight into why we or they act certain ways. Even seemingly confusing behaviors can start to make sense. It guides us towards hopefully better ways to support well-being and ultimately actualization.
It's about seeing those underlying currents beneath the surface actions, recognizing what's really driving things.
Yep.
And Maslow left us with this provocative idea. A satisfied need stops being a motivator. So if many of us in modern society have our most basic physiological and safety needs largely met, what responsibility does that place on us, both as individuals and maybe as a whole society, to create the conditions where those higher needs, love, esteem, and ultimately self-actualization can actually emerge and flourish for everyone?